Brandon, Jameson, Michael, Maruf, thank you for joining us. I'll let you take the reins, and I'm just going on a wild guess here and assuming that Jameson is moderating, but I'll let you guys duke it out for that position.
That's a pretty good guess, and that's largely because I don't have anything of substance to contribute, but I do know how to not stop talking. So that is what I'm told is the number one thing in a moderator. So with that in mind, I'm going to try and stop talking because we have a very interesting panel here today. Of course, we have Maruf Raza of MNP, the sponsor of this panel. He's the National Director of the Public Companies Practice there. We have Brandon Roop, the Vice President of Investment Banking at Stifel Financial. Hi, Brandon. And Mike Franks, who is the Managing Director of the Noetic Fund, focused, of course, on the psychedelic space as it needs to be. So if we just want to go, we'll start with you, Maruf. We can just give a bit of an introduction in terms of your relationship with the psychedelic space specifically, and then we can move forward into some questions.
Yeah, perfect. I hope everybody can hear me. Jameson, as you indicated, I sort of head up our public markets practice at MNP. We're a full-service accounting and advisory firm. So a large part of our involvement in the psychedelic space is primarily, on the audit side, helping a lot of these companies get ready as part of their, go public strategy. And really, that's what the panel is about. We've worked with a lot of the early stage entrants in the space. And so really that's where we're, hopefully coming in to shed some light.
Brandon?
Yeah, hey everyone. I'm at Stifel GMP here, formerly GMP Securities. We're focused on the investment banking side, so that's sale, trading, research, and financings for public companies. In terms of the psychedelic space, my coverage area is healthcare, which encompasses psychedelics and the cannabis space, and obviously with the flurry of new psychedelic companies, investment banking and fundraising is a main priority for everyone.
Michael?
Yeah, thanks very much, Jameson. So we have three partners at the Noetic Fund, myself, Nassim Saluji, and Saad Shah. We initiated our fund, I guess, in February of this year after doing some diligence on Compass Pathways back in 2019. And we've made 18 investments to date.
Wow, that's substantial. So to get things moving in a sort of general sense, we'll maybe follow that same structure of responses if that works for you guys in terms of when we have a question that applies to all of you. Where do you see the early opportunities popping up? Is it more in like the production of psilocybin or other psychedelics? Is it more like wellness brands, research and development? Where do we see the interest at this obviously very nascent stage of the sector?
Yep. So I guess I'll go first, and I think obviously Brandon and Michael have a much greater purview of the various deals. I think right out of the gate, I think there was a couple of mushroom type deals, and I thought everybody thought that the sector was really a cultivation type sector. Everybody thought this was the second coming of cannabis. That was pretty early on. I think people have quickly realized it's more of a biopharma synthetic play. And so I think there's a lot of R&D opportunities, that are coming through in a variety of different, formulations. We see a lot of deals as well on the clinic side, because I think there's a path to revenue on the clinic and ketamine side. Ketamine in North America anyway, being sort of the only legally prescribed psychedelic that's out there. And yeah, so maybe I'll turn it over to Brandon.
Yeah, Brandon, where are you seeing the activity?
Yeah, it's similar to what Maruf was saying. It's kind of from the drug development side, the nutraceuticals, the clinics, and then some like wellness retreats down in Jamaica. I think it's kind of spanned, like some are taking a pretty broad approach here, and they're trying to get into the nutraceutical side so they can provide some revenue in the interim while they're doing the development side and kind of fund those clinical trials. And then from kind of the drug development side, they're really sticking to the main drugs like the MDMA, the psilocybin, LSD, Ibogaine, and they're really focusing on those big indication areas where it's less specific, like your anxiety, your PTSD, your major depressive disorder, TRD, stuff like that.
So, Michael, where do you see the particular, because you have obviously a niche style of investing, what sort of companies sort of fit your profile?
Well, we spent a lot of time trying to build an optimal orthogonal portfolio with a lot of asymmetry. So we're looking at all the tryptamines by age and stage, and we're trying to predict forward what the world might look like in 5 or 10 years and taking bets on various compounds. But we're also looking at augmented reality and VR. We're looking at various softwares and technologies that we think will complement the overall psychedelic therapeutic supply chain. So what's so important with psychedelic therapy is the set and setting, right? And who's in the room with the patient. So we're looking a lot at technologies and softwares that look at how the patient moves or how they behave either in or post-therapeutic protocol. We're looking at wearable devices that patients could use before the therapeutic protocol or after the therapeutic protocol as complementary sort of tool sets to help with the overall therapy. And then we're spending less time looking at clinics because we looked at, I guess we've looked at about 250 companies in the sector right now. And we haven't seen a lot of clinic plays we like right now. I think one day we may make a clinic play, but those plays for us right now are more of a private equity play, not a venture capital play. Yeah. But we're complementing the tryptamines, the compounds with a lot of technologies and software opportunities as well.
So would it be fair to say, kind of for analogy to the cannabis space, it's like the non-plant touching side of the business that you're focused on? I know psilocybin and psychedelics aren't necessarily a plant. That's
yeah. I mean, the partners in the Noetic Fund made no investments in the cannabis sector whatsoever. So we look at the psychedelic sector is much different. We really believe it's going to disrupt the global, $1 trillion GDP global pharmaceutical marketplace. So we think there's a lot of opportunities, a lot of different areas. We also believe that some of the world's best companies haven't even been invented yet. But we're also looking at backing companies with deep scientific acumen and scientific knowledge, right? So we're trying to stay away from companies that may not have the deep science. We're trying to back, obviously, great teams with great ideas.
So obviously the great science has to be paired with great wells of cash for this type of research. So, obviously, Mike, you had your component to it. I'm curious though, for like the companies that are really trying to go directly for the sort of pharmaceutical style research, Maruf, what are you seeing in terms of the types of financing that's happening and where exactly the money's flowing? Like, is it the big ticket stuff really going for research or for other things?
I think there's obviously some of the stuff that you're seeing in the U.S. like a Compass, which obviously has some serious backers from a private equity or Silicon Valley perspective. But when you look at most of these earlier stage companies, you are seeing a lot of public capital flowing in, and particularly in Canada, I guess while we certainly have exceptions, generally, we don't have that much high risk venture capital. Not just in this sector, but in any sector. And so, not that this is cannabis, but when you compare cannabis from a deal flow perspective, it was some similar names and similar kind of deals that were happening where you needed to really access that funding from a public perspective. And so right now, I think people are funding. I think it's general working capital. I think they're funding the R&D. But I think that, unlike, say, again, to compare to the cannabis scenario, where the path to revenue is less certain, the R&D play is obviously longer. So where the second phases of capital will come in, it's to be determined. But right now, to get it off the ground, a lot of these companies are being seeded and funded. Really, the initial seed capital is coming in via the public markets or the going public markets that we see.
Brandon, how about you obviously occupy a particular space in the market where you'd have a good sense of how it's going. Maybe you can start off, give a sense of like what's the volume like in terms of deal flow in the space now.
I'd say volume's pretty high. It tapered off a little bit before the Compass kind of IPO happened, but that really brought life back to the sector. And Michael's seen over 250. We've probably seen closer to 70, and we've chosen 2 or 3 of them to work with. So there is a lot of noise out there, and it's harder to find quality. And that's why guys are being much more specific in terms of like the money and where we see it coming. I'd say there's less appetite from the bigger funds to kind of put private money to work with no timeline. Like if you're working in an R&D company, like this could be 5 years, it could be 10 years. I'd say a lot of that's dried up. There has to be that pathway to liquidity. I'd say from the public side on the R&D and biotech, it's predominantly your U.S. biotech firms that are writing your $5 to $10 million checks. I'd say in the Canadian markets for the smaller guys, it's predominantly driven by the Canadian retail, and that's kind of the whole appeal of being in the Canadian capital markets.
Mike, how about you?
Well, yeah, you don't think of the Canadian market as a biotech market, do you, right? So that's going to be taken up by the retail investors, which I think brings a lot of support to companies going public on the Toronto exchanges before they head down to the U.S. to get the real, perhaps institutional biotech support. But we really believe that the money will follow the efficacy, and the efficacy rates that we're seeing in some of these early stage tryptamines and compounds is profound, right? You're seeing efficacy rates that are 2 or 3 times some of the best pharmaceutical drugs in the marketplace today. So I think the efficacy rates that are good based on deep, profound science won't have any hard time raising money at all, and they'll have all the money they need to raise at various stages of financing.
So then why is it here that has to be the case? And Maruf, will bring it back to you. Why Canada? Why? I mean, there's a lot, you could look at the history, of course, of all the fundraising that happened in the cannabis space, but even before that, probably one could make the case that this is the country that has the infrastructure, the financial infrastructure to fund a play like this.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're exactly right, and I think you have to go beyond the cannabis sector. I mean, Canada, I mean, when you look at its history, it's been highly successful at a global level of raising high risk capital for a variety of ventures. And so I mean, I would say that if you're in that $5 to $20 million mark, there's probably no better country on the global stage to get you high risk capital. I think a lot of that comes to we're very versed as investors in an ecosystem in the extractive industry, particularly the junior extractive industry, right? And
interesting. So, like the massive presence of junior mining stocks and everything.
Massive presence of junior mining.
Right, sure.
So it's high risk, high reward, right? Like you don't know what's there at the end of the day. So this is obviously quite different in a way. And so that money ultimately flowed into other high risk venture, whether that's tech or cannabis in a very big way. Right, a lot of mining money came into cannabis, the early stuff, right? Maybe not the institutional stuff later, and it's the same, I would say, presence. While the type of investor might end up being different on the psychedelic side, there is the sentiment and the risk tolerance is there. And I think what Michael was referring to later is that when these companies need to go and raise that second phase, 50, 100, whatever that next phase of R&D is, once they've proved out a bit, there is a stepping stone into the U.S. where perhaps the biopharma market is different from in terms of the next phase of evolution.
But Brandon, actually, one of the points obviously that Michael made as well that I know we had discussed previously is there really isn't a biopharma retail investor base in Canada. So isn't there a bit of a trade-off there in terms of there might be a higher appetite for risk in this country, but isn't it harder to tell the story to investors?